I think it's a fear and concern of most citizens that there is so much violence in our country.
Kids are getting brought up in violence, and that's their way of life. That's all they know how to do.
Our society has become much more violent, and certainly the young people have become much more violent. We read in the paper about kids going to high school carrying a weapon for self-protection.
Violence itself is just an incredibly distressing phenomenon. It's not new to our culture, but I think so many of us have felt removed from it, that it wasn't going to touch our daily lives, but it's begun to touch all of us.
Maybe I'm naive, I don't know, but I just don't believe my right to bear arms means people walking up and down the street with handguns in their pockets, or if two people get in an argument, one takes a gun out and shoots and kills the other. That's not the right to bear. That's not what our forefathers meant in the Constitution.
Some people will fire a gun for the first time and they can get turned on by the power of it because it's so powerful. It's slightly intoxicating to have a gun and then have control. You can make people do what you want with a gun.
It took a while to really go, this is really what's happening. This is a person with a rifle and he's shooting at another human being. I just really didn't think that was what it was. When I saw the guy with the gun, I thought that he was like shooting squirrels or just being kind of stupid. And then I saw that there was a person on the ground where he was that he was shooting at.
To hear gunshots consistently, and then you hear police officers responding and they're returning fire. And so that was the thing that really kind of turned the town on its ear, because, you know, we was actually in a gun battle so close to downtown.
We do not want to be reminded of the few murders that have occurred here.
The biggest issues facing our children today probably would be violence.
I was in that high school, 5 to 10 years ago, and there wasn't that kind of violence. But all of these kids had seen guns at the school and were frightened by that.
Everyone was affected, I believe, by the violence that has occurred and still occurs in Chapel Hill, some more than others.
Now, my neighborhood, the poor neighborhood, that's where we need help. I moved in 2 years ago in this neighborhood. I bought the house. And 2 months after, I wish I'd have sold it. But it went through my living room instead. Come and see it, 220 North Street. But it went through my living room, went through my kitchen. And I got it as a memorial.
It's like it's not real. It's like you can shoot someone in the head, you can blow their brains out, and in 20 or 30 minutes, it can all be redone. I don't think they grasp the seriousness of what they're doing.
Maybe art can do something with or about or from that concern of violence. What are your concerns?
For me, the solution to the problem that we have in our community, and in fact we have in our whole country, that relates directly to guns and violence, really relates to our understanding of the problem.
It's important for children especially not to just look at guns as the force of authority or a power trip, but as having one single-minded purpose, and that is to kill.
The gun buyback was designed to get guns off the streets and out of the homes. I think that we succeeded in that because we saw people from 16 years old to 80-something years old bring in guns and get money for their guns.
I think the one I remember most was a young lad that came in with a sawed-off long gun with a strap on it that could be easily hidden under a short coat.
That one gun is off the street, and the guns were turned in with no questions asked.
I like to think that perhaps the fact that he turned that gun in might have changed his outlook on life.
If we can get these people to turn in the guns, and get them to realize that you don't have to use guns in order to survive, because I myself never owned a gun, and I got this far, so 18 years, so that's success for me, I think.
But I don't think that buying guns back is a very effective way to get rid of the violence, because until the reasons for buying guns are eliminated, you know, removing a couple of hundred of them really isn't going to make a difference.
I think the gun buyback, if it saved, again, a single life, it probably was pretty effective, and there's no way of knowing that.
And I guess after the first buyback, which yielded 100 and some guns, somebody looked at the pile of inoperable guns and said, gee, maybe we ought to make art out of, or do something with them, and maybe art is one thing to do.
We're living with violence all around us, and how they could capture attention in a work of art, a work of public art. I don't know how they could do that.
The committee felt that a creative response to the growing problem of gun violence in Chapel Hill would increase public awareness of that problem and could encourage a thoughtful turning away from violence.
Making a sculpture out of the reclaimed guns sounded like a really good idea. Seemed like a really positive thing to do with a lot of negative weapons.
The high school students that I talked to were strongly in support of the art piece. I think that they, maybe more than some of the adults, understood the impact of gun violence on our society.
The Chapel Hill Public Art Commission is to be praised for taking on such a thorny issue with its first public art project.
It's a symbol. I think it's a very appropriate symbol.
And I think if it were actually built, then the three-dimensional presence of that sculpture in the community would come to mean something different than just the concept of the piece itself and people understanding or knowing about the concept.
My idea was initially to make evident the reality of what happens when you fire a bullet in a sort of ballistic sense. Which, and more metaphorically, which would make evident that the collapse of time and space that occurs when a bullet is fired.
I was absolutely shocked. It was the opposite of what I expected to see. I think people were expecting some kind of transformative thing, saying, you know, here we can take this negative thing of violence and guns and transform it into something positive in the community.
I agree, I concur that this is a monument to violence. It's depressing and to me ugly.
And I think that the idea of sitting on one of these sculptures with bullet holes behind me is the most uncomfortable and in the opposite direction of what I would like to feel.
The events that took place, the people who were killed, you know, it's a very human issue, and it's not something that is going to have a lot of meaning if it's just, you know, concrete blocks.
It's going to be painful for people who personally have experienced violence.
It's not so dramatic or eye-catching that you say, oh my goodness, there's a .22 caliber gun staring me in the face. I mean, someone could drive through town and think, look at those odd-shaped benches.
I think that people are reacting to changes in culture more so than they're reacting to Thomas's work.
I don't think we need anything that doesn't fit in with beauty and cheerfulness. And if you will think, all of these murals that have been painted on the walls that everyone sees around town, the parking deck, everywhere, there is nothing threatening, there's nothing but pleasure derived. They're very innocent and cheerful.
Well, I think if every time we went down to downtown Chapel Hill, we saw something that reminded us of what has happened, I think over time, this might have an effect.
But from the child's paradigm, we don't know exactly what they're receiving and what message they're sending to them, and we don't want it to take the chance of it being the wrong message.
It may raise the conscious level to the point that people will talk about it more, more in a positive sense of the gun safety. It's always going to bring some controversial, whatever you do, but I think the positive aspect is going to outweigh the negative.
I asked my kids, what do you think about there being a sculpture up on Franklin Street that has to do with guns? And they looked at me and they said, why would they want to do that?
I mean, it's a very beautiful little community and pretty peaceful, and I think it might be a good thing to bring some more controversial art in.
I think that there are a number of people who are looking for a kind of Norman Rockwell sculpture that will represent a kind of mythic time, an idyllic time that isn't what we're living in today.
There'll be a Caroline of victory. We cross the field, the foe has fled, cheer our team.
The image that kept coming up was the sort of crisp autumn football weekend. I'm not sure how you sculpt that, but that came up more than once.
Peace is symbolized by doves, water, children playing, clouds.
I kind of like the idea of an angel, you know, but put me down as old-fashioned, okay?
You know, I don't want it to be all nice and pretty, so we forget what the original idea was.
And my perspective on it in the column was, why not do something that, as children walk down the street, they would see something more positive and something that encouraged them to rise up like a phoenix rather than to pursue an avenue of violence.
And I think for this to really be successful, we should find out what would get kids hooked. What would really want to make kids, teenagers, really want to come out and see this? What would make adults? I mean, what's been the power of the Vietnam Memorial?
Frequently, for instance, in the case of the Vietnam Memorial, people were very unhappy with that when that was first proposed and designed. But then, after a lag time, now it's become one of the most beloved monuments in our country. So I think there can also be the opportunity for the public to interact with pieces of public art that they might not have been thrilled with in the beginning.
This is our place that this art is going to be, and we want to decide, we want to participate in that decision process.
And I know the committee tried to get public participation, and they were frustrated that the public didn't come.
People in town often don't get upset about something, one way or the other, until it's too late, so to speak.
The Chapel Hill community, to me, isn't passive, and all of these reactions, pro and con, are a reflection of how Chapel Hill is an active community that cares about where it is.
When art is in a public setting, it should be held to a slightly different standard because people don't always have a choice about whether to view it or not.
I think a lot of the input, some of the input that I heard, if I heard correctly, asked for things and made statements that I think can't be ignored. That really must be heard and that necessarily change or evolve the original idea. What I heard in various ways over and over again was, well, violence may be an issue, in fact is an issue, but we don't want to sort of dwell on that in our most public space.
Art does raise the level of awareness in a community with any kind of message that you give, whether it be negative or positive. I think people pay attention to art. It's not preachy. It's many times it can be simple. It's easy to understand. It's visually pleasing. You don't really have to think about it. Sometimes you can just look at something and just understand what it means.
Focusing on art as a way of helping us solve solutions, helping us think about problems in a way that really is not threatening and that, in my opinion, is quite beautiful, is a very clear and good message that I'd like for us to send to all of our children.
If we don't have the public art, we're just not going to be able to leave behind any legacy for future generations. And if we think about what's preceded us and all of the wonderful works of art that have been left behind by previous cultures, for us to contemplate, marvel at, aspire to, I think that's a sad statement about where our culture is today.
There ought to be these human moments that cause us to think, to be inspired, to be cajoled throughout our public environment. I think that would really stimulate us as human beings. It would help us be connected to one another in a different way.
I think that's part of public art, is to promote dialogue.
You know, I for one would be happy to be a part of a process to talk about what ideas are appropriate or not appropriate, or, you know, just what we should do at all.
I just think it's important to remember the bad as well as the good, because otherwise we have a very wrong view of our own past.
And I think that it'll mean a lot more to people if they can really connect it to themselves and the community.
Can we, as a community, use our imagination, our creativity, our attention, our energy to express succinctly enough what it is we do want in our public space?
I think, you know, out of most everything like this, you get more people's ideas in, you get more thoughts, you come up with a different idea, and it usually is better.
I think if we can get to where something actually gets built, I believe it will be a better piece having gone through all this long and at times painful process.
If you're going to make public art, put it in a public place, not hidden away like the pieces that are on campus now.
We should decide upon a site or make some recommendations to the site and turn it over to the artist, see what he can do with it. And if we don't like what he proposes, we'll ask him to do something else or get somebody else to do it.
Ultimately, the community is going to have to just, at some point, let the artist free, cut loose from the conversation, and let the artist create the work of art, and trust that the artist is going to come up with something that's going to be a response to all those conversations that they have been having together.
What's really, I think, necessary is to come up with both a theme and place, and then go, you know, and that is what gets turned over to the artist.
I don't think you can improve upon this theme of diversity of peoples, diversity of opinions as a theme for this sculpture.
That's what you would get anyway.
That's right. Welcome to Chapel Hill.
I hope the town has the guts to actually go forward with something so that an art experience, they end with a real art experience, which isn't about liking or disliking. It's a deeper experience than that, in my mind.